My name's Andrew, and I work in the Grants and Incentives team at Fullstack. This is a short presentation about R&D tax considerations ahead of the end of financial year. We'll provide you with a bit of a checklist of what you need to do before the end of financial year, and we'll also discuss some recent events in the R&D tax program. So just a bit of a disclaimer to begin with. The information presented here is general in nature and shouldn't be relied on, and specific tax or legal advice has to be sought relating to your own circumstances. So speakers today, you have myself. I'm Assistant Manager in the R&D Tax team at Fullstack Advisory. You also have Jack Dean, if you'd like to say hello, Jack.
Hi everyone. So I'm the R&D Tax Manager here at Fullstack. I'll be taking you through a section towards the end.
Cool. It also got me, Stuart. I thought it'd be great to get a good insight as to some of the things that we should be doing right before year end with our R&D tax.
So just to give you a high-level overview of the R&D tax application process, the first thing you do is obviously you conduct eligible research and development activities within a given financial year. That's 2023-2024 for this year. You have to make and maintain documentation that shows the progress of your R&D activities and tracks their associated costs. At the end of the financial year, you submit an R&D tax application. This includes a project description, an initial estimate of what you spent on R&D, and therefore an initial estimate of your refund. Once your activities are registered, then you receive a registration number from AusIndustry. You then have to calculate the actual notional deductions for your R&D spend, and those notional deductions are submitted in your R&D tax schedule with your company tax return with the registration number attached. After that's submitted, the company tax return is processed by the ATO like any other company tax return, and the refund, if applicable, is processed with it. So with what can't wait until July, at the beginning of our checklist, I'll hand it over to Stuart to discuss superannuation of employees.
Cool. Yep. So to claim super, we really just got to make sure that it's cleared the bank. So make sure that it's part of the claimable employment cost of an R&D activity. Just need to be aware that if it's paid after July, that's non-deductible, and you also can't include as a notional deduction in the R&D tax schedule. Cool. All right. You also have to pay your associated entities by electronic funds transfer. What are associated entities there? Well, per the legislation, it's by way of family or business connections. This could include founders, executive staff. It could include associated entities, their consulting entities, parent companies. So you need to make sure that the funds have cleared before 30th of June. Unpaid associate amounts, though, if you don't meet the deadline, they can be carried forward and deducted in the following year, or at least until when they're paid. So just be wary if you've had any paid amounts from the prior year as well, because you might be able to claim in this current FY24 R&D.
So I'll just jump in here to discuss depreciation. How you choose to depreciate or expense the various assets that you may have acquired in the year will determine potentially how you can claim them under the R&D tax program. So for the 2023 year, we were dealing with the temporary full expensing program, which had a specific provision in the legislation that allowed companies to fully expense their assets up to a certain level and also claim them as notional deductions in the R&D tax incentive. So it gave quite a significant increase potentially to the amounts you could claim. If you didn't do that, if you depreciated them as normal, you would calculate the decline in value for that particular year, and you would be able to claim the portion of the decline in value to the extent that item was used in R&D for that particular financial year. Now, the temporary full expensing program has now ended, and the government has indicated that it is going to reinvigorate the instant asset write-off, which preceded the temporary full expensing. Now, under that program, you were not allowed to write off the full value of the assets and claim them in R&D. You had to choose one or the other. If you wanted to claim in R&D, you would have to depreciate them, as I just previously explained. We're still waiting on the final legislation for that program, And so we're not 100% sure how that would interact with the R&D tax incentive. There is a little bit of time. You don't necessarily have to make a decision now. The election of the treatment will be done in the company tax return. But it's just good to be aware that potentially there will be a negative interaction between those two programs. But certainly, as with your kind of standard tax, purchasing assets prior to the end of the financial year, will potentially increase your ability to claim those.
And the final thing in our checklist of things you need to do before July is submit an overseas finding if you're conducting eligible overseas activities in 2024. So you have to submit an overseas finding within the application, within the financial year that those activities are conducted. However, the outcome will probably come after the financial year, but you can always submit an amendment to your company tax return to register the cost of those activities later. I should say ordinarily overseas activities can't be claimed and can't be registered and their costs can't be claimed, but you can apply for one of these findings if the activity can't be conducted in Australia due to one of 4 reasons. Those 4 reasons are shown on screen there, but they are access to facilities or expertise, access to populations that aren't in Australia, breach of biosecurity, or access to a geological feature. To get one of these findings, you'll also need independent evidence that those resources weren't available in Australia. So just on record keeping and documentation, there is a potential for increased compliance activity in the coming years as the ATO and AusIndustry wrap up their random sample reviews, which we'll speak about just in a moment. As a reminder, insufficient records can really hinder or entirely prevent the ATO from confirming that you conducted eligible activities and that the costs that you claimed were related to those activities. And so for that reason, it's really critical to maintain records proving that the work was carried out and that the cost was accurately calculated. There is a requirement for those records to be contemporaneous, but obviously the end of financial year offers a good chance to collect any records that you have. So project reports, timesheets, invoices from contractors, and any other records that can help you substantiate your claim in the future. So for the updates to the program, I'll hand over to Jack just to discuss some recent changes.
Yeah, so along with just that checklist of things to think about prior to the end of the financial year, we thought that this webinar would be a good opportunity to just provide some recent updates on the program. So I attended the stakeholder reference group, which is a collection of the kind of top R&D consultants in Australia. I meet with the ATO and the Department of Industry and Science on a regular basis to provide feedback with the program. There was a lot of discussion in that around 200 random sample reviews, which the ATO and AusIndustry are currently jointly working on. That is, as a little bit of history, compliance activities has been relatively low through the COVID period because the government put their resources elsewhere, took them away from the R&D tax program. A lot of those resources have now returned. And so we are seeing those random sample reviews are a chance for the ATO and AusIndustry to kind of refocus, collect some data about the program, about how people are interacting with the program, and then potentially design further compliance guidance or other support activities on the back of that. So there is a bit of an increase from the ATO on certain high-risk areas. We have a few more pre-issue checks recently. So normally your tax return would be processed without anyone really having too much of a look at it, apart from in rare circumstances. We are seeing some more activity there, particularly when it comes to companies that have high levels of associate expenditure. They are doing some checks there before they release the refund, which does cause delays on the refund, obviously. But I think overall, there are some positives in that companies are potentially knowing before they receive the refunds and spending the money that there's an issue. So not having to pay back funds previously received is in some ways a positive. AusIndustry are also raising some concerns around how activities are registered. So those random sample projects, 77% have been commenced. They've actually put the timeline back, I believe, to July 2025 to finalise those. So it is quite long. Only 7% have been escalated to examination, and they have been a comment from ATO and AusIndustry that the quality of records among claimants has generally been fairly low, much lower than they would have liked to see. So that's where it comes back to the documentation piece is very important. it certainly is something to consider before the end of the financial year, but it should be considered throughout the year. And we, for many, many years, have tried to advocate a much more forward-looking R&D tax compliance process rather than being a purely kind of retrospective once a year kind of claim process. Interestingly, they have not identified that a single industry is at greater risk of non-compliance than any other. I think a few people were possibly expecting that the software industry would be of higher risk of non-compliance, but I'm not sure whether that statement there is an indication that software is good necessarily, rather than everyone is kind of struggling a bit and needs to pick up their game there. So the ATO did raise a lot of concern around associate payments. As I mentioned, we're seeing some delay of refunds where companies identify large amounts of associate expenses in their claims. They are in particular looking at overseas entities that are setting up, in their terms, shell companies in Australia to conduct R&D activities, and well, sometimes not to conduct R&D activities, but to obtain a benefit under the R&D Tax Incentive program that they would not be entitled to. And they identified a few kind of schemes there where, often there was no actual kind of presence in Australia. They didn't have any employees. They just had a single director who was also a director of a related foreign entity. So you really do need to make sure that, in general, as was mentioned earlier, that your associate amounts paid, that they're actual payments, that amounts have actually been incurred, that they're not artificial constructions, round robin transactions. So where an associate lends you the money then you pay back, and then they lend you more money and then you pay it back. To try and say it was paid, the ATO is often saying that doesn't constitute payment. That's just an artificial construction. So you just really want to make sure that all your ducks in a row where it comes to associate payments, especially. I mentioned it briefly, I think AusIndustry on the technical side concerned. It's actually interesting that these are things that they've been saying for probably 7 years plus, almost all the way back to the start of the program, but people are still struggling, and whether it be the companies or the consultants that are advising those companies, a lot of their concerns around whole of project claims. So where a claim is too kind of high level to be able to determine whether there's actually a technical uncertainty or where that lies, combining multiple activities into a single core activity. They are also looking a little bit more into an area that we identified a year or more ago, where there's a real misunderstanding around social sciences, arts and humanities being an excluded core R&D activity, and how that interacts with some of the new kind of areas where tech is heading, particularly around AI and machine learning and that kind of thing. And they, again, highlighted that companies often had a difficulty in proving what they've done. And they indicated that having a lack of records at a technical level, because R&D is so uncertain, that you would expect, if you're conducting activities with an unknown outcome, you would have more records rather than less. Business as usual activities may not have as many records as R&D activities, and so they are in some circumstances denying claims because companies aren't able to provide any evidence that an activity was even conducted, let alone that activity was an R&D activity.
Right. And I just wanted to share some considerations for ESIC. There's a lot of innovation companies, I'm sure, they're claiming the R&D tax offset. So ESIC naturally follows if you've got investors there. So ESIC, there's a big incentive there for the investors where they get 20% tax offset on the value of the investment. But this is only in the year that the shares are issued to them. So there's a lot of investors out there and they're receiving safe notes. It's important to know that they won't receive the benefit until the safe notes actually convert. So if you're after the benefit in this financial year, you need to somehow make sure that those notes convert before 30th of June. Of course, seek legal advice here too.
I should say there's also a requirement for the ESIC that you invested in to report that issue of shares by 31 July of 2024 if you want to claim that tax offset. So
next slide has our contact details there. So team at Fullstack or either of us individually, or give us a call. There's plenty more information on our website as well. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew, Jack, for helping run it. And we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.